When I think about family, I've always thought about togetherness, holidays crowded with laughter, birthdays where the dining room table bowed under the weight of food, and even those quiet weekday evenings when my children would sit at the kitchen counter doing homework while I cooked. I gave my life to making sure my family always had what they needed. Sometimes it meant working extra shifts, sometimes it meant going without things for myself, but I always believe that's what parents do. You give until your children stand taller than you ever could. So when my children grew into adults and began their own families, I expected, maybe foolishly, that some of that care would circle back. Not that I needed spoiling or praise, but simply to be remembered, included. I thought I had raised them with enough love that they would naturally carry me with them as they moved into new seasons of life. Which is why, when I first heard whispers about the family cruise, I assumed, without question, that of course I would be part of it. It was my daughter, Melissa, who mentioned it casually over the phone. "We're all thinking of doing something big this year, Mom," she said, her voice bright. "Maybe a cruise in the Caribbean. The kids would love it. You know, sunshine, beaches, all that." I laughed, picturing myself on the deck of a ship with a wide straw hat, the salt air in my lungs, and my grandchildren splashing in the pool. "Oh, that sounds like heaven," I said. "When were you thinking?" She hesitated for the briefest moment before answering. "Still working out the details. Well, let you know." It was such a small pause, so fleeting that I almost didn't notice it. Almost. As the weeks went on, I'd catch snippets in conversations. My son Daniel mentioned researching excursions, snorkeling, island tours, even a special dinner under the stars. My daughter-in-law posted in the family group chat about coordinating outfits for formal night. Every time, I'd chime in with a cheerful comment, trying to weave myself into the planning. "Oh, snorkeling sounds amazing. I'll need to dig out my old swimsuit." Or formal night. "I might need to treat myself to something sparkly." But no one ever directly replied to those messages. My words just sat there, little echoes that vanished in the flood of their back-and-forth chatter. I told myself they were busy, distracted. I didn't let myself believe the truth. Not yet. Then came the day Melissa stopped by to borrow my credit card. "Just for a day or two, Mom," she said, breezing through the door like she always did. "We're booking the cruise today, and I maxed out my limit with some house repairs. I'll put it right back once the payment clears." I hesitated. My credit card was my safety net, the one thing I held on to in case of emergencies. But she was my daughter. My flesh and blood. She had 3 kids to look after, a husband between jobs, bills that never seemed to stop. So I handed it over, telling myself it was just a temporary favor. That's what family does. We help each other. For the next few days, I waited for the call to say the booking was done, and maybe a follow-up question like, "Hey Mom, do you want a window cabin or balcony?" Instead, silence. When I finally asked Melissa about the card, she smiled sheepishly. "Oh, yeah, the payment went through. Thanks again, Mom. You saved us." She slipped the card back into my hand like she was returning a borrowed pen. No mention of repaying me. No mention of my ticket. That night, sitting in my quiet kitchen, I logged into my online banking. My hands trembled as I read the statement, several $1,000s charged to Royal Caribbean. A full family booking. And not a cent of it for me. My chest ached as I stared at the screen. They hadn't just forgotten me. They had deliberately used me, my trust, my finances, to fund their dream trip while leaving me behind. In the days that followed, the truth settled over me like a cold fog. There was no oversight. No misunderstanding. The cruise was set. The cabins assigned. The excursions paid for. Every last detail arranged without me. Yet every time I visited Melissa's house, the kids would squeal excitedly about the big boat and the ice cream machine on deck. Daniel would brag about the ports of call, Jamaica, Cozumel, the Bahamas. Their laughter stabbed at me, not because I wanted to take their joy away, but because I realized they had carved me out of it entirely. I'd sit there on the couch, smiling weakly, nodding along, pretending I wasn't gutted inside. Pretending I wasn't invisible. One night, I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror as I was leaving Melissa's. My shoulders were slumped, my eyes dull. I looked like a woman who had been erased from her own family story. And that was the moment something inside me shifted. I thought about all the years I had poured myself out for these children, cooking, cleaning, working overtime so they could have the sneakers, the class trips, the music lessons. I thought about the holidays when I stayed up until dawn wrapping gifts, or the nights I went hungry so they could have seconds. And here I was now, the bank account they could dip into when it suited them, but not worthy of a seat at their table. It wasn't just about the cruise. It was about dignity, about respect. That night, as I lay awake in bed, I realized I had a choice. I could keep bending, keep excusing, keep shrinking into the background of their lives. Or I could stand up, maybe for the first time in a long time, and remind them that I was not someone to be used and discarded. I didn't know exactly how I would do it yet. But I knew this much. They would not sail away on a vacation paid for with my sacrifice while I sat at home nursing my hurt. No. If they wanted to exclude me, then they would feel the weight of what it meant to take without giving back. And for the first time in weeks, I slept soundly because I knew the story wasn't over. When I first saw the charge on my credit card statement, I thought, it must have been some kind of mistake. Maybe a double charge, maybe a glitch. But as I scrolled further and saw the name of the cruise line spelled out clearly, each transaction linked to bookings, cabin upgrades, excursions, I felt my stomach drop. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a random error. My own family had planned their dream vacation, swiping away without a single thought that it was my name, my card, my savings funding their joy. I remember staring at the screen, blinking hard as if the numbers would rearrange themselves into something more merciful. But they didn't. And in that moment, the betrayal didn't come just from the money, it came from the silence. Not one of them had asked. Not one of them had called. They had booked a trip, boarded a ship, and left me behind with nothing but bills. This wasn't the first time they'd leaned on me. I've always been the dependable one. The one who'd lend without interest, babysit without question, show up without fail. I gave Melissa money when she wanted to enroll Daniel in private school, even though I had my own bills stacked on the counter. I co-signed a loan when my nephew wanted a car, because you're the only one with good credit. I even took on an extra shift at work once so I could cover a deposit Melissa couldn't make on time. Back then, I told myself it was family. That this is what family did. We carried one another. But each time I gave, I noticed how rare it was for them to give back. A forgotten thank you. A half-hearted "we'll pay you back soon." And then silence until the next crisis. And still, I gave. Because in my heart, I thought if I kept giving, I'd prove my worth. That they'd see me not just as a wallet, but as a person they loved. Foolish hope has a way of clinging to you like that. When I discovered the charges, my first instinct was to call Melissa. Surely, there was an explanation. Maybe the card had been saved from an old booking. Maybe it had been a mistake. My hand shook as I dialed her number. It rang. 4 times before rolling to voicemail. "Melissa, it's me," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "I saw some charges on my card, and I need you to call me back." No call came. I tried again the next morning. Straight to voicemail. I sent a text, simple and direct. "Melissa, did you use my credit card for the cruise? Please call me." Still nothing. Daniel didn't answer either. My nephew, the same one who had cried when I handed him car keys years ago, now seemed to have erased me from his phone entirely. That silence cut deeper than the numbers on the bill. They weren't just using my money, they were erasing me. Pretending I didn't exist, as though I were a ghost haunting their joy. As the days passed, I thought back to other moments. Times I had swallowed disappointment with a smile. I remembered Melissa's last birthday party. I had baked her favorite cake, lemon with raspberry filling, the way our mother used to make. When I arrived, carrying it carefully in both hands, she barely looked at me. Her friends laughed and filled the room, while I was seated off to the side near the coats. When they cut the cake, she didn't even announce who had baked it. I told myself it didn't matter. But it did. Then there was Daniel's graduation. I had driven 2 hours, sitting through the ceremony with a bouquet of flowers cradled in my lap. I clapped until my hands stung when his name was called. Afterward, in the parking lot, he brushed past me with his friends, barely stopping long enough for a photo. Later, Melissa thanked me in passing, as though I had simply mailed a card. Each memory piled up like stones on my chest. Alone, they were tolerable. Together, they painted a picture I couldn't ignore. I had been invisible for years. Used, tolerated, dismissed. And now, this cruise, the grand celebration of togetherness, had been built directly on my back, while I sat at home forgotten. At first, all I felt was hurt. But hurt, when left to boil, becomes something sharper. By the third day, that sharpness turned to anger. I found myself pacing the living room, clutching the bill as though squeezing it would force the ink to bleed. I replayed every conversation, every ask, every time I had bent to make their lives easier. And then I pictured them on that ship, laughing, dining, posing for photos, while I sat alone with overdue balances in silence. That vision stayed with me. Melissa in a sun hat. Daniel at the buffet. Their laughter echoing over the ocean waves, fueled by the money they hadn't earned. And beneath the anger, something else began to grow. I thought I hadn't allowed myself before. What if I didn't take it this time? What if I made them feel what I felt? It wasn't about revenge at first. It was about reclaiming something of myself. For too long, I had accepted their treatment, believing that patience and generosity would eventually earn me a seat at their table. But this cruise, was proof that no seat had ever been waiting for me. I sat at my kitchen table late into the night, staring at the glowing digits of the credit card balance. I thought of my options. I could report it as fraud. But fraud meant strangers. And this was no stranger. This was my blood, my family. The credit card company might forgive the charge, but Melissa and Daniel would walk away unscathed, maybe even laughing at how soft I was. No, that didn't sit right. If they thought I was invisible, if they thought they could spend my life's work and sail off into the sunset without consequence, they were wrong. A plan began to take shape in the corners of my mind. Not all at once. At first it was just a whisper. What if you didn't stay silent? What if you turned the tables? I knew things they didn't remember, or maybe things they never bothered to learn. The fine print of contracts, the little details of travel insurance, the ways money can be moved, frozen, or revoked. Over the years, I had managed not just my own finances, but those of my late husband's small business. I knew how bookings worked, how payments cleared, how quickly joy could sour when a trip turned uncertain. Melissa and Daniel thought I was just soft old me, the one who would roll over and take the hit. They didn't know I had kept every receipt, every record, every login. They didn't know I had more power in this situation than they imagined. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. I could do more than just cancel the charges. I could ruin the trip piece by piece, day by day. And in doing so, I could finally make them see me. By the end of that week, the hurt had hardened into resolve. I wasn't going to beg for answers. I wasn't going to call again, only to be met with silence. I wasn't going to let them enjoy what they had stolen. If Melissa and Daniel wanted to treat me like I was invisible, I'd show them what invisibility truly felt like, when a cruise meant to be paradise became a nightmare. For the first time in years, I felt strangely alive. Nervous, yes, but alive. Because finally, I wasn't just reacting to what they did to me. I was taking control. And as I began to sketch out the steps, listing what I knew, what I had access to, and what I could do, I realized something. Maybe I wasn't just planning to ruin a trip. Maybe I was planning to reclaim my dignity. And they would never see it coming. Have you ever been so tired of being invisible that silence itself starts to feel like an insult? That's where I was. After a week of pacing the house, replaying their laughter in my head while they sailed the ocean on my dime, I realized anger wasn't enough. Anger is loud, messy. But resolve is steady. And if I wanted to make them feel the weight of what they had done, I needed more than rage. I needed a plan. And plans are something I've always been good at. I went to the cedar box I've kept tucked away for decades. Inside were the records of a lifetime, warranty slips, marriage certificates, insurance papers, even old checks. And most importantly, credit card statements. Every charge, every balance, every payment carefully recorded. Paper remembers what people forget. One by one, I laid them out. I wasn't scribbling in fury, I was writing cold, deliberate facts. Dates, merchant names, amounts. Then I added another column, every unpaid favor, every IOU, every well-get-you-back that never came. Seeing it all on paper was like staring at an unvarnished portrait of betrayal. Heavy, honest, unignorable. I dialed the bank, not with fury in my voice, but with precision. I explained, an unusually large charge posted on my card. I need it reviewed. The representative asked the standard questions. Did I authorize it? Did I give the card to anyone? I told the truth. Melissa had borrowed it for a day or two and handed it back. When the woman on the line said she'd open an inquiry and temporarily block further charges, I felt it, my first small victory. Bureaucratic, maybe. But powerful. The kind of power they never imagined I would use. And I knew one thing they didn't. Once a payment is disputed, a cruise line can't finalize bookings. Cabins, upgrades, even excursions can all be thrown into limbo. I had spent years learning how the fine print works. They thought I was soft. They forgot I was steady. Next, I called the cruise line. My voice stayed calm. There may have been unauthorized use of my account for bookings under my name. I said, "Please put a hold pending investigation." The representative took the details, reservation numbers, passenger names. She explained procedures, excursions delayed, payments flagged, onboard credits frozen until authorization cleared. She said it casually, like reading from a script. But to me, it was confirmation. Rules could work in my favor. Back home, I photocopied everything, statements, booking confirmations, even the reference numbers the bank gave me. All of it went back into the cedar box. My evidence. My ammunition. Then, I planted my first seed. A message in the family group chat. Hope everyone has a safe trip. Please let me know if any of the tickets were charged to my card. Haven't seen an exit confirmation yet. Melissa responded almost instantly with a breezy LOL. The cousins chimed in with packing tips. But Daniel's reply? We covered it. Don't worry, Mom. Covered it. He lied. And I let the lie sit, like bait in a trap. 2 days later, the bank called. The hold was official. Because of the dispute, final payment hadn't been released to the cruise line. The impact hit quickly. That evening, Melissa blew up my phone. "Mom, what did you do? The cruise line says something about a dispute. We're on the ship and they're saying cabins are being reviewed. This is a nightmare." Daniel chimed in too, short and sharp. "You ruined everything. We paid for this." They hadn't paid. I had. And now their paradise was beginning to crack. Reports started trickling back. Excursions were delayed. Onboard credits locked. A cousin even messaged me privately, "Are you sure you didn't authorize this? People are saying the cruise line flagged the whole booking." My response was simple. I authorized household, not vacation. The silence afterward was louder than any shouting could have been. I won't lie. At night, the guilt crept in. I'd sit in my quiet kitchen wondering if I had gone too far. But then I'd remember Melissa's laughter when she told friends about borrowing my card. I'd remember Daniel brushing past me at his graduation without a thank you. I'd remember birthdays, holidays, milestones where I gave and gave until I vanished. This wasn't cruelty. This was consequence. I wasn't hacking accounts. I wasn't screaming on social media. I was meticulous. I read the cruise line's policies, combed through guest contracts, and highlighted clauses. I acted as a cardholder, not a villain. Policies are blind. They don't care about family politics. They only care about procedure. And I had learned how to wield procedure like a blade. One by one, the small inconveniences stacked up for them, lost confirmations, frozen. Credits, awkward calls at the front desk. On the surface, these were just ripples. But ripples on a ship are never small. By the third day of their trip, while I was brewing tea at home, my phone rang. Daniel. His voice was tight. Forced calm wrapped around panic. Mom, call me back. Now. I waited. Then I called him. His words came out raw, edged with desperation. Mom, please. We said we were sorry. We didn't mean to exclude you. Just talk to the bank. Tell them to release it. We can fix this. Well, why are you money? Anything. For the first time in years, I held the power in the conversation. Daniel, I said, steady as stone, you used my card without asking. You treated me like I was invisible. If you want this fixed, you'll face it with me. You'll call the bank with me. You'll admit what you did, and you'll apologize. The silence on the line stretched long. Then came one shaky inhale. That moment wasn't the end, but it was the beginning of something different. For once, they couldn't laugh me off. For once, they had to look straight at me, at the mother, the aunt, the woman they had dismissed for years. And I realized something. The real victory wasn't in canceled excursions or frozen credits. The real victory was in being seen. Because invisibility had been the cruelest punishment of all. And now, they had no choice but to see me. The ship was still sailing, but their vacation was sinking, slowly, quietly, methodically. And this was only the start. Because the plan I had put in motion wasn't about ruining one trip. It was about rewriting the rules of how they treated me, forever. And they were just beginning to understand that. When the cruise finally ended, I knew they'd be coming back with storm clouds over their heads. I pictured them stepping off the ship, dragging suitcases with sour faces, snapping at each other in hushed voices, their perfect vacation reduced to a string of small disasters. And I knew exactly why, because greed and carelessness always leave wreckage in their wake. And sure enough, the phone calls started almost immediately. The first to ring me was my brother. He didn't even bother with pleasantries. What did you do? He barked. His tone was sharp, clipped, more accusation than question. I feigned ignorance. What are you talking about? Don't play games with me, he snapped. The ship cut off our tab halfway through the trip. Charges were bouncing back left and right. We couldn't book excursions. The staff was breathing down our necks. They said the primary cardholder revoked authorization. That's you. I let silence hang in the air for a long beat before I answered. Oh, I said lightly, almost innocent. You mean the credit card you all decided to use without asking me? The one you assumed I wouldn't notice? That card? His voice cracked. He started stammering. We were going to pay you back. You ruined everything. We looked like fools on that ship. And I laughed. Not cruelly, just at the sheer absurdity of his logic. You think I ruined it? You left me behind. You used me. And you thought you could just skate by without consequences. Actions have a price, dear brother. He slammed the call shut. But I knew that was only the beginning. By that evening, my phone was a storm of notifications. Cousins, in-laws, even distant relatives I hadn't spoken to in years were suddenly experts on morality. Some were spitting with anger, accusing me of being petty, of humiliating the family. Others were cautious, testing the waters. Was it true? Had I really pulled the rug out from under the entire cruise? I responded the same way every time. Yes, I did. And I would do it again. Because they needed to hear it plain. This wasn't about forgetting me at some backyard barbecue. This was deliberate exclusion from a major family trip funded by my money. That wasn't just inconsiderate. That was theft dressed up as entitlement. But the more messages came in, the more I noticed something interesting. Not everyone was angry. Some were quietly thrilled. One cousin texted, "Good for you. They've been using you for years." About time someone pushed back. Another, "Honestly, they deserved it. Maybe now they'll think twice before treating you like an afterthought." That's when I realized my revenge hadn't created cracks in the family. It had only revealed the ones already there. Of course, my parents weren't about to let it rest. A week after their return, they arranged a family dinner. I knew what that meant, a tribunal. I was the defendant. They were the judges. But I wasn't walking into that restaurant to beg forgiveness. I was walking in with my head high and my spine straight. The cruise crew was already seated at one end of the long table when I arrived. They looked sunburnt and weary, their tans failing to disguise the bitterness etched across their faces. My mother started the meeting with her voice tight. "We need to talk about what happened." I folded my napkin carefully, then nodded. "Yes. Let's. Why don't we start with why you thought it was acceptable to use my credit card without asking me?" The silence that followed was thunderous. They exchanged glances, like schoolchildren caught red-handed. Finally, my sister-in-law muttered, "We thought you wouldn't mind. It was easier that way." "Easier for you," I said sharply. "Not for me. You excluded me from the trip, but included me in the bill. Do you have any idea how insulting that is?" My father tried to smooth things over, his voice stern but measured. "What they did wasn't right. But did you have to go that far? Canceling payments, leaving them stranded, that humiliated everyone." I looked straight into his eyes. "And what about me? Wasn't it humiliating to be left behind while you all sent beach photos, on my dime? Did anyone stop to think about how I felt?" Not a single person had an answer. As the dinner dragged on, it became obvious they wanted me to apologize. They wanted me to be the scapegoat. But I refused. Instead, I leaned forward and laid it out plain. "Here are my boundaries. From this moment on, no one uses my finances without permission. If you want me involved, ask me. If you don't, fine. But don't you dare treat me like a wallet you can reach into at will." They muttered protests, but the guilt was written across their faces. They knew the truth. For years, they had gotten away with treating me like background furniture, always useful, never respected. And now, the furniture had spoken. By the end of the night, not a soul at that table was smiling. They had expected me to arrive humbled, tail between my legs. Instead, I had arrived standing taller than ever. News of the cruise scandal spread faster than spilled wine. Neighbors whispered. Church members gossiped. Co-workers smirked knowingly. Some sided with me, others with them. But whichever way they leaned, the story grew legs. And honestly, I didn't mind. Because for once, the narrative wasn't about me being soft, pliant, invisible. It was about me refusing to be trampled. About me drawing a line. about me proving that the quietest person in the room could still turn the tables. My reputation changed. No longer the pushover, I became the one who doesn't take nonsense anymore. And that was a reputation I could wear proudly. The weeks that followed were strange. Some relatives avoided me completely, their shame and anger too heavy to mask. Others reached out more often, their tone tinged with something new, respect. And me? I felt lighter. Years of quiet resentment had weighed me down like lead. But when I drew that line in the sand and stood firm, I let go of that weight. Yes, the fallout had caused chaos. Yes, relationships would never quite be the same. But something priceless had come out of it, a voice I refused to silence again. Because once you find your voice, you don't go back to whispering. And once you claim your dignity, you don't hand it back. The dust didn't settle overnight. If anything, the weeks following that confrontation dinner only deepened the divides in my family. The cruise fiasco became a scar we all carried, but depending on who you asked, it was either my fault for pulling the rug out, or their fault for cutting me out in the first place. And maybe both were true, in a way. For the first month afterward, the silence was almost deafening. My brother, usually the loudest, most domineering voice in the family, went quiet. No texts, no calls, no smug comments about football or barbecue recipes. Just nothing. My sister-in-law unfriended me on social media, as if deleting me from her digital world could erase what had happened in the real one. Even my parents, who usually checked in at least once a week, cut conversations short. They would ask about the weather, my health, then wrap things up in record time. No lingering chatter. No warmth. At first, I felt the sting of that silence like a fresh wound. I questioned myself. Had I gone too far? Had revoking my card mid-cruise been unnecessarily cruel? Maybe I had become the villain in my own story. But then I would remember sitting alone in my kitchen, staring at the banking statement that showed thousands charged to my account while my family laughed about outfits for formal night. I remembered the sting of exclusion, the humiliation of realizing they had chosen to use me without including me. No, the silence wasn't punishment for me. It was guilt eating away at them. And guilt, I knew, had a way of forcing people to face truths they'd rather avoid. About 2 months later, whispers started trickling back to me through the grapevine. The so-called cruise crew wasn't as united as they had seemed. Some of the younger cousins, who had been tagging along for the trip, started speaking up. They admitted they hadn't even known the card being used was mine until the chaos broke loose on the ship. They were the ones who pushed it, one cousin confided during a coffee catch-up. She met my brother and his wife. We just went along because we thought it was already cleared with you. When everything blew up, it was obvious we'd all been dragged into their mess. That revelation didn't surprise me. My brother had always been the ringleader, with his wife whispering in his ear. But it still stung that not one person had spoken up beforehand, not one had thought to say, maybe this isn't right. Maybe she should be here with us. Still, hearing that some of them were turning against the leaders gave me a small measure of vindication. Their perfect little alliance was crumbling, and all I had done was shine a light on their behavior. The last thing I expected was an apology. Yet one rainy afternoon, my phone buzzed with my mother's voice on the line. "We need to talk," she said, gently but firmly. "Your brother wants to apologize." For a moment, I thought I had misheard. This was the same man who had yelled at me, blamed me, and stormed away from the family dinner like a spoiled child. But apparently, the fallout had pressed heavier on him than he cared to admit. We met at my parents' house the following Sunday. The sky was gray, the kind that made the world feel smaller, quieter. He walked in looking deflated, his usual bravado stripped away. His tan from the cruise had faded, and in its place was a man who seemed suddenly, painfully human. He cleared his throat. "I shouldn't have used your card," he muttered. "And I shouldn't have left you out. It was wrong. The words were clumsy, reluctant, but they were there. For my brother, that was monumental. I didn't let him off easy. You didn't just hurt me financially. You hurt me emotionally. You made me feel invisible. Do you understand that? His gaze faltered, then steadied. I do now. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. Forgiveness is never a single act. It isn't a switch you flip, it's a process, a conscious decision repeated over and over again. That day, I decided while I wasn't ready to forget, I was willing to move forward. But not blindly. This time, there would be boundaries. No financial entanglements. My accounts, my cards, my safety nets, completely off limits. No exclusionary planning. If they wanted to organize trips, celebrations, or events, I had to be included or at least informed. Transparency going forward. No more secrets, no more assumptions that I wouldn't mind. To my surprise, no one argued. Maybe they were embarrassed. Maybe they realized how close they had come to shattering the family bond completely. Either way, the balance of power had shifted. Family gatherings after that were different. When I walked into a room, people looked at me differently. Not with pity or dismissiveness, but with something like caution, maybe even respect. It was as if I had shed the role of pushover and stepped into a new version of myself, someone who demanded to be seen. My cousins especially began treating me differently. They started confiding in me, sharing frustrations about always being the overlooked ones, or how certain relatives hogged all the attention. I realized I wasn't alone in my hurt. I had simply been the first one to push back. I hadn't just ruined a cruise. I had disrupted a hierarchy. Of course, the story didn't stay contained within our four walls. It spilled out into the wider community, becoming almost a parable. At church, whispers circulated about the family that tried to vacation on someone else's dime. At work, colleagues asked me, half joking, half admiring, if I had really pulled off what they'd heard. At first, the gossip embarrassed me. But gradually, I realized something. It had changed how people saw me. I wasn't quiet anymore. I wasn't the pushover. I was the woman who had drawn a line, the one who refused to let love be mistaken for weakness. And oddly enough, I began to feel proud. Time heals, but it also teaches. The biggest lesson I carried wasn't about revenge, it was about value. For years, I had allowed my family to treat me like a safety net, the person who would always bend, always give, always sacrifice. I thought that was love. But love without boundaries isn't love. It's servitude. By pulling the plug on that cruise, I didn't just ruin their vacation. I reclaimed my worth. And as hard as the fallout was, I knew it had been worth it. Because I would rather stand alone with dignity than be surrounded by people who only saw me as a wallet. Months later, another family event came up, a cousin's graduation. And this time, things were different. From the very beginning, I was included in the planning. My opinion was sought. My presence was expected. Nobody joked about forgetting to invite me. It wasn't perfect. The sting of betrayal still lingered, and some relationships remained strained. But for the first time in years, I felt like I had a real seat at the table. I had become the reminder they needed. Respect is not optional. Even family ties can fray when taken for granted. Sometimes, late at night, I would wonder what might have happened if I hadn't acted. If I had swallowed the humiliation, stayed silent, and let them sail away. The answer was simple: nothing would have changed. They would have kept using me, kept carving me out, kept draining me while pretending I didn't exist. By standing up, even in a way that shocked them, I forced a reckoning. And sometimes, that's the only way families grow. I didn't ruin their trip to be cruel. I did it to remind them and myself that I deserve better. And maybe, just maybe, they learned something too. It's strange how one decision can slice your life into before and after. Before the cruise, I was the dependable one, the silent wallet, the background character in every family gathering. Always smiling, always nodding, always reaching for the check when no one else wanted to. After the cruise, I became something else entirely, the story they whisper about, the one they couldn't erase. And truth be told, I needed that transformation just as much as they did. For years, I thought my worth was measured by what I gave. Pay for the meal. Offer the spare bedroom. Cover the bill. Each act carried a quiet, desperate hope. Maybe this time they will notice how much I care. But instead of gratitude, I got entitlement. It took the sting of betrayal, the empty chair where my name should have been, the ship leaving without me, to snap me awake. That night, staring at the confirmation email canceling their payments mid-ocean, I realized I wasn't a supporting role in their story. I was the lead character in mine. And it was time I started acting like it. Weeks later, I stood on a bridge overlooking the river that cut through my city. The same place I used to walk with my family after Sunday dinners. The night air was cool, sharp, carrying the hum of traffic and the faint ripple of water below. I leaned against the rail, staring at the reflection of the lights dancing on the water. Part of me wanted to cave. To pick up the phone, apologize, pretend it never happened. That's what I'd always done, smoothed the edges, swallowed my hurt, restored the peace. But another part of me, the part that remembered the sting of being left behind, kept whispering, if you go back now, nothing changes. You'll vanish again. That bridge became my line in the sand. My moment of decision. I could either stay the person who let others decide my worth, or I could step into the new role I'd begun writing on that cruise. So I made a vow, right there, under the city lights, no more erasing myself. Not for family. Not for anyone. And the river carried my old self away. The hardest, most liberating lesson? Love without boundaries isn't love, it's servitude. Family has many ways of disguising the word burden. Sometimes it's guilt, sometimes it's manipulation, often it's called a favor. And every time I said yes without wanting to, I became complicit in my own erasure. I don't fully blame them. People will take what you allow. But I do hold myself accountable for waiting so long to draw the line. Now, when I say no, I mean it. When I say yes, it's because I want to. Not because I'm scared of being left behind again. And strangely, that makes the yes sweeter and the no stronger. It's tempting to count the losses, trust fractured, family dinners forever different, the ache of knowing things can't go back. But when I measure carefully, I see more gains than losses, respect. Even if it's laced with caution, they look at me differently now. They think twice before asking for help. Freedom. I am no longer the family ATM, the safety net no one thanks but everyone expects. That weight is gone. Voice. The most precious gift. I finally speak, and they finally listen. What floored me most wasn't my siblings, it was the kids. My nieces and nephews, who used to see me as background decoration, now watch me like I matter. One of my nieces said quietly one afternoon, "You showed me it's okay to stand up for yourself, even if people don't like it." Her words hit harder than any argument. Because maybe my real legacy isn't the fight itself, it's the lesson that kindness doesn't mean silence, and generosity doesn't mean exploitation. If the next generation learns that, then none of it was wasted. Of course, there are nights when the guilt gnaws. I replay the scene, my brother's rage, my parents' silence, the cruise line staff explaining why the charges bounced. I wonder, did I humiliate them more than necessary? Could I have chosen a softer road? But then I picture myself sitting at home while they sipped cocktails bought with my money. Laughing, carefree, not even glancing at the empty chair that should have been mine. And I know the truth, if I hadn't acted, nothing would have changed. Sometimes strength is quiet. Other times, strength looks like pulling the plug and letting the fallout fall where it belongs. The story didn't just stay in my family. It leaked into friendships, work, even acquaintances. People whispered, "Savage." Others admitted, "I wish I had the guts to do what you did." That's when I realized I wasn't alone. The details might have been unique, but the theme? Universal. Almost. Everyone has felt taken for granted by someone they love. I just happened to draw the line in a way they couldn't ignore. And that made people lean closer, like maybe my story could be their permission slip, too. Months later, the raw edges have dulled. I still go to family events, but carefully. My brother and I share space, cautiously civil, never the same as before. Do I still love them? Yes. Do I fully trust them? No. But love and distrust can coexist, messy, uneasy, but real. We sit across the same table, plates between us, laughter forced but present. Yet beneath it all lies that invisible line, a quiet acknowledgement, I won't be erased again. And they know better than to test me. It's not perfect harmony, but it is balance. And sometimes, balance is enough. If you asked me if I regret it, my answer is simple, no. I don't regret canceling the payments. I don't regret forcing the reckoning. What I regret is waiting so long to believe I deserved better. Because the cruise wasn't really about a vacation. It was about belonging. And when they left me, they told me I didn't belong. By pulling the plug, I reminded them and myself that I do. If that made them uncomfortable, good. Discomfort is the soil where change grows. Someday, when this story gets retold, and oh, it will, I hope it isn't remembered as the time I ruined their cruise. I hope it's remembered as the moment I chose dignity over compliance. The moment I said, I am not invisible. I am not expendable. I am family. And family means my presence matters. My voice matters. My worth matters. Life doesn't hand out lessons in classrooms. Sometimes it hands them out in heartbreak, betrayal, or on a cruise ship leaving port without you. Hey, erase what I know now. I am not a wallet. I am not a shadow. I am not a background character. I am whole. I am worthy. I belong. And if you're listening, if you've ever felt erased by the very people who should have lifted you, let my story be a mirror. You can draw the line. You can say, no. You can protect your dignity. Because sometimes, the most important journey isn't on a ship at all. It's the one back to yourself. And I, for one, am never turning back.